Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Happy birthday to me. In this episode, I take a journey through the corridors of time, reminiscing about the milestones, challenges, and growth that have shaped me into the person I am today. Join me as I share candid thoughts on the lessons learned and the moments that have left an indelible mark on my soul. This isn't a celebration of another year added to my age, but a contemplative exploration of the experiences that have sculpted my existence. That all sounds quite serious. Thank you to the listeners who have tuned in these past several years. I am so happy to have you join in as I reflect on my birthday. As always, please share this podcast with someone you know if you enjoyed it. And if you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, I would greatly appreciate it. I want to take a moment to thank my current patrons for their unwavering support, and I want you to know how much I appreciate each and every one of you. If you would also like to become a patron of the show and you're not already, you can do so by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello. It is my birthday today. So I thought I would do a solo podcast since it's been a minute. And for those of you joining online, I am at the Wallam Cultural Center. You can see behind me, there's a lot of art. There is a lot of cool artifacts from my father's collection. And I thought today I would spend some time in here because it's a really nice place to sit and think and reflect. And, you know, on birthdays, it's a good time to do all of that. And I find it very interesting, actually, because to me, celebrating the day you were born isn't this like major achievement. So I actually think the person who gave birth should be the one celebrated. But in any case, me being a bit of a cynic, I do tend to think that Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, all of those holidays are a little bit of a marketing scheme, but I digress. Back to birthdays. It is my birthday. And I am 46 years old. And because it's not ending in 5 or 0, it's not a huge milestone, quote unquote, it means I don't really get the big celebration, which again, marketing, right? In any case, I felt that the irony about thinking about birthdays is that I tend to actually pay very little attention. But I looked up on the calendar and saw this podcast was going to drop on the same day that is actually my birthday, January 30th. And I figured, you know what? This is a good day to do a little bit of reflection and kind of share some thoughts on this. So when I was younger, I was always very, very excited my birthday was coming up. And obviously it's because birthdays equal presents. I think most kids feel that way. And as I got older, probably in your 20s, you start to kind of dismiss the idea, right? Or some people do. I know some people who, you know, get the birthday hat on and they celebrate and they cheer because, yay, it's our birthday. But I really tended to be a bit of a curmudgeon and started to kind of lean away from the big birthday celebrations as I got older. And I think has to do a lot with my personality and the fact that I'm actually an introvert by nature. For those of you that have watched, Oscar and I have podcasted about that before, our introvert, extrovert natures, and had a conversation on that. But personally, I thought, you know, you're celebrating a birthday and you're 46, and now I'm kind of reflecting on what do birthdays mean and the lessons I've learned. And at 46, wow, that means I'm kind of on the other side of the rainbow. Not to get super depressing on you or anything, but it just made me very reflective and made me kind of start to think about, you know, what are the things that I want to celebrate today? And one, of course, is that I'm alive, I feel healthy, and I'm really fortunate that I get to spend time with the people I love, people that I enjoy, and, you know, we definitely call that a win. But as I mentioned earlier, to me, birthdays really prompt reflection. So I thought I would blog today. I got up this morning really early and I said, let me write down some of my thoughts, and I'm going to share some of those with you. But one of the things I wanted to show you was that my mom gave me a copy of the Stoneham Independent recently, and I actually brought it with me, but because I'm 46, I'm starting to lose my memory a little bit, and I left it next door at the Waltham Temple, but I will get it, and I will insert it here to show you for those of you on YouTube. But she gave me a copy of the Stoneham Independent. You guys are like, what is that? Stoneham is a city in Boston, and it is where I was born, and it was dated January 25th. Now, I was born on the 30th, but on the 25th in 1978, the headlines show snowstorm, what the protocols are, what you should be doing, because at that time, there had already been 20 plus inches of snow on the ground, and it was a little bit kind of hectic in the area. I was born on January 30th, 1978, and that's between two of the most memorable snowstorms in US history in the Northeast. Now, in the Midwest, the first storm was known as the Great Blizzard of 78, and that spanned from January 25 to 27. So as you can see, there was a lot of activity going on. In Boston, where I was born, there was already the snow on the ground, and my mother was concerned. She's like, how am I even gonna get to the hospital? How are we gonna drive through the roads? Is it gonna be safe? Fortunately, she was able to get to the hospital. It was safe. But it was really, really stressful. And that snowstorm was very memorable because, as Bostonians would say, the nor'easter of 78, which hit on February 6th through the 7th, that was a week after I was born, kind of made my mom not be able to leave the hospital because there was over 27 inches of snow over, I believe, like a 35 or 7-hour period with hurricane force winds. Cars were stranded. I think there was flooding and no power, and snow was just literally everywhere. If you see photos of it, they basically had just inches and inches of snow to where all the cars were covered. Thousands of cars were stranded. There's like pictures that are really epic because the highway, apparently, people actually died during this storm, and thousands were injured because they actually had to leave their car to walk home and try to get home because their cars couldn't go anywhere. And the reason that happened was we just didn't have the technology in meteorology and weather forecasting that we fortunately have today. I live in Florida. There's hurricanes all the time. We watch the little map. We know what's happening. And because there was already one snowstorm, they thought, okay, this is what we're dealing with. They just were not prepared for the crazy blizzard that hit back to back. So thankfully, right now we can be prepared, but at that time it was really, really stressful. And my mom always says, oh my gosh, you were born between two of the biggest snowstorms. All of the old schoolers from Boston that knew when I was born always blame me for the storm. One of my students actually thinks that I can control the weather. So I guess it makes sense that I was born between two of these huge weather systems. Now, I would not have ever intentionally caused this level of destruction. Let me just say, okay? I was 0 years old, so it's not my fault. However, I do tend to have a flair for the dramatic. I admit, fierce snow, hurricane force winds, that tracks. In addition, I was a breech baby. So I came out into the world kicking. That's right. I came out into the world kicking, and thinking back about my day of birth, I want to, one, apologize to all of those affected by the storm, and two, just kind of compare the havoc that I was told I caused to kind of the whirlwind I am now. My dear husband, Oscar, and a lot of you know, is our favorite co-host on the show often. He says when I enter the room, it's like a tornado, and that his blood pressure goes up and it's super stressful. And he said it's just very overwhelming. So now maybe that makes sense since I have a history of being like a blizzard, I guess. So the day of my birth, the thing I learned was I was a disruptor. And as a child, it's kind of interesting because my mom always tells me, oh my gosh, you were so fearless. You would run into the pool without even a thought. You would look at the doctor when they gave you shots in your arm, and you would just go, oh, okay, thanks for the shot, and no tears or anything. And I would find the highest place to jump off of because I was a daredevil. And that makes me really laugh because now at 46, I am kind of scared of heights. I get motion sickness. I can't go on a roller coaster anymore. And I really don't enjoy getting my shots. Now, I won't say I cry or I'm afraid, but I don't generally look forward to it. So it is what it is, right? I guess we change as we age. And I look back from then to now and I think maybe I should celebrate my birthday. I've been through a lot and I've changed a lot, and it's good to kind of reflect on that and really gauge what have I learned these 46 years. And I'm really grateful because I feel like I've lived enough for multiple lives. I feel very, very fortunate. And a lot of people ask, like, what are your highlights? And it's really kind of remarkable because a lot of times people would have thought it's centered around Kung Fu and it's centered around like big events that happen. And while that's certainly true, it's interesting because when I look back at the fundamentals and what kind of shaped who I am and what's led me to this point, it really goes back to your childhood really having a big impact. I know this sounds like a therapy session and I'm like sharing like when I was a kid, but in all seriousness, people wonder, do you remember what it was like in Boston? And I was 2 when I left. So most people will say that's impossible. There's no way that you can remember. But I swear, I can almost smell and hear the sounds of a very brief moment at the North Station Kung Fu School. And I don't know if it's because I know I've seen a photo, and that photo is pretty epic. It is of me standing there with a huge smile on my face that basically takes up the entire frame of the photo because my cheeks were extra wide and I was barely 2, but I was standing. And in my mind, I feel like I can remember that moment and what it felt like being there. Like I said, I just felt the school, right? I felt what Wallam Kung Fu felt like at the time. And I've seen pictures as a baby where I'm in the Wallam sweatshirt in front of the Kung Fu altar, and I don't remember that obviously, but I do have this faint memory and I'm always curious, like, was that a dream or do I remember it? But I really feel like I remember it. And that is just so memorable to me. And it stayed with me all these years. And clearly I've been Team Wallam for a while now, but it's kind of interesting because it really has a lot to do with my first memory. Like that's my first memory. And of course, it was at a Kung Fu school. Now, I'm not a fan of Black Mirror. My husband, Oscar, huge fan. Anything dark, disturbing, he's all over it. You know, those Korean movies where everyone dies and then they shoot the dog at the end also, and it's super depressing. He loves those movies. I hate them. Black Mirror is scary to me. So back to me being afraid of everything. That's one of the things. But I found that one episode where the lens was able to like record things and play them back. Like kind of how interesting would it be if you could get a first person like replay, you know, starting early enough where you could appreciate that of like, oh, this was you from 0 to 1. Here's some highlights from the recording from your eye lens or something, on like a first person perspective. Because now, you know, there's not a lot of footage of me when I was a baby. There was, I think, 8mm, and you'll see some of that in Pui Chan Kung Fu Pioneer, but there's not a lot of video footage. Now the iPhones and iDevices and digital stuff that's like literally on us all the time, you could catalog the entire life from the birth all the way through of a child. But for me, it's just thinking about those memories that are lost. It's kind of a wishful thing. So I definitely don't want that, because at the same time, there's definitely parts of my childhood I don't want to relive or ever see. Again, not to get really dark about it, but when I think about birthdays, one of the things that I think about, believe it or not, is literally the day of birth, meaning birthing, meaning being in the delivery room. And I actually assisted with a birth on accident. That's right, on accident. You're wondering, how could you accidentally, you know, assist in a delivery room? Because this wasn't like, oh, we were stuck in the car in the snow and I had to deliver a baby like on TV, nothing like that. The story goes, I was basically visiting my cousin because I love newborns. Let me kind of go back a little bit. I love newborns. They're like my favorite thing. They are just all of it. I love how tiny they are. I love how innocent they are. Holding a newborn baby is my favorite. So I always go to the hospital the day a baby's born. I often go to the hospital when I want to show support for someone I really care about. You know, the day they're delivering, kind of give them the thumbs up and be like, good job, you're about to pop out a human. But I went over to hang out with one, with the mother, and I was talking and we were laughing, and all of a sudden, the whole delivery team runs in and they're like, all right, it's go time. And I was like, it's go time. I was literally in a position where if the delivery area where the mom was on the bed, right? I was on the opposite side, and the team came in situating themselves where the door was on the other side. I would literally have had to be like, oh, excuse me, can you stop what you're doing? I need to step out. So I was in a position where it was super awkward to ask to leave. And I know it seems like, how can that be? It was really that quick. They came running in and they're like, let's go. And so 1 minute I'm sitting there talking and laughing and we're hanging out. The next minute, the doctor team's like ready to go. The lights are on. Everyone's in place. And then I find myself giving Kung Fu breathing advice between contractions to the mom to be. And sidebar, Kung Fu breathing, the slow inhaling and exhaling like Baifoot Sao, for those of you Wallam practitioners, which is our Buddha hand breathing, is super effective for while you're delivering a baby. It was also so sudden, the mom didn't even get to have an epidural. Like, it was really like go time. So I remember standing there, going through the contractions. In between the contractions, that's when the breathing's really essential. And then after that, you like listen to the delivery team and you push and you do your thing. But it was like witnessing a mythical being coming into the world, seeing that baby come out. And I was thrilled. It was really, truly one of the most moving moments I have ever been privileged to witness. And I am so grateful I got accidentally stuck in the room, because I'll never forget it. And it really made an impression on me. Like, birth is a miracle. And some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, she's gonna have a baby soon. She's baby crazy. Let me be clear and let me finish. I've helped raise a lot of kids. I've babysat countless times. I've changed diapers. I've played with rambunctious toddlers. I've dealt with and mentored intense teens. I like newborns. After about a month, I'm good. So I borrow the kids and then return them to their very, very brave and amazing parents. It is definitely, the right choice for me. And so I know it sounds like I'm baby crazy, and I am. I love newborns. I love them so much. They're just perfect. Even their cry is perfect. But I absolutely love being a Kung Fu teacher and mentor, and I am so grateful. I have the gift of children in my daily life. I get to see 3-year-olds all the way to 90-year-olds, and like, honestly, that cycle continues. After you get to a certain part in that rainbow, we become childlike again. So I have the gift of being able to interact with kids on a daily basis, and I'm very grateful for that. So I don't want anyone to get any wrong ideas here, but definitely being around kids and thinking about birthdays, I've really learned that birth is an absolute miracle. That's one of the lessons I've learned. So my family is quite the handful. For those of you who've met the Chan fam, you've seen us maybe on videos where we're on vacation, we're on cruises together, we do Kung Fu, we do Tai Chi. They're super active. I am so grateful that I am often running after my parents and Tina. But if you think about Mimi being born between the two blizzards, being in this huge weather system, and that I'm a force of nature. Think about my father. I don't know. We don't actually know what it was like. To be honest, we're guessing his birthday because at that time, records and things like that, we just don't have them. But I'm pretty sure he was probably born during a typhoon or some sort of weather system, because he is quite the force of nature. My mom was born on Halloween. She calls herself a witch. Okay, she says it, not me. And there is definitely preternatural forces in my lineage. It is without a doubt. I have this strong feelings about that. In summary, birth is magical, and certain births are extra magical and have all kind of mystique behind them. And for me, even though I was born in Boston, I was raised in Florida. Like, I don't know how I was born between those two blizzards, because I can't even handle the cold at all now. It's like below 70 degrees. I've got my sweatshirts on. It's not the right environment for me. So I'm a big chicken, but I've always considered myself an East Coaster and definitely a Floridian. And what's interesting about that sidebar, or tangent rather, because as you know, this is the Tangent Podcast, is being a Floridian back then has a lot of different connotations than it does today. So when you say you're from Florida today, it's, oh, you guys are always on the news for the craziest thing, XYZ. We're not going to talk about that, because that's activism podcast. We're not doing that today. In the 80s, growing up in the Florida was like senior citizens. Oh, only retired people live there, or sunshine and beaches. And that was kind of the Florida branding. Or Disney World, right? Everybody thinks about Disney World, the happiest place on earth. Or what are you doing next? I'm going to Disney World, right? That's the thing we all think about. For me, it was filled with kung fu classes, right? Skipping school on Chinese New Year, performing in shows, and just being around an insanely large family. And travel. I did a lot of travel, even as a young child. And for childhood memories, most kids always talk about their friends in their neighborhood, riding bikes, and kind of your typical kid stuff. And not that I never rode a bike or hung out in the neighborhood, but it was much less frequent than my afternoons at the Wallam Temple, terrorizing the live-in training students. I know I've talked about this before, but it's a really fond memory I have. So in my elementary years, it was one of my favorite things to do. And now, to give you kind of the scope, the lay of the land, the temple was on a 2-lane road, and it was not a dirt road, but it was small. There was woods, trees everywhere. There was a lot of wildlife. There was a time where there were just chickens running around all over. There were a few homes, different houses next door across the street. And people from around the world would come and live in these houses. We called them the dormitories. And so they would stay anywhere from weeks to indefinite periods of time. And using your imagination, just imagine the type of human that says, I'm leaving my family and work and everything I do, and I'm going to Florida to train at a kung fu temple in the middle of the forest. So thinking about that type of human in the 80s and saying, who would do that? Those were my playmates. Those were the people I hung out with after school. Very unique, dare I say eccentric, but it was definitely like temple life, right? That was what I did. And people were just drawn to this temple, and still are. We would get martial arts visitors from all over the world, even today. Actually, someone is a true traditional Chinese martial art practitioner when they show up and they're like, hey, I am here. I've heard about the Wallam Temple. I wanted to come here. My family's over at Magic Kingdom today, but I wanted to make sure I made a stop at the Wallam Temple. So we are like the tourist attraction for the martial artists, for the big fans. And so that's when we know we really have like traditional martial art fans that come through. But in any case, by the time we moved to Orlando, my dad was pretty famous, and that's why he attracted people from all over the world to come and live here. He was very established in Boston. People up there remembered him from Chinatown doing the lion dance for Chinese New Year. He was famous for jumping off 2-story buildings. He climbed that light pole, so it was like an electric or telephone poles, and I don't know how many feet they are because I'm not very good with feet, but pretty high. And they would actually carry those poles through the streets, and he would climb and be up top with the lion. There's some really cool pictures of that in Pui Chang Kung Fu Pioneer. But he was famous. Everyone knew who he was. And then he left and came to the middle of nowhere. A lot of the students followed him. A lot of people came. And he was also on the cover of Inside Kung Fu and Black Belt magazine, which was like the window to martial arts back then. Okay, I know there's still magazines now. We see them in the stores, but most of the things are on our phone, right? We don't actually get magazine subscriptions. But back then it was the only way to even know what was going on, who was around. Imagine a world without the internet, everybody. Imagine a world where we didn't have all of that at our fingertips. And so it was really the window to finding out what was going on in the world of martial arts. And so many people collected this magazine. And again, this is where you know who the diehards are. My dad and I and the team, we were in the Zhengzhou International Wushu Festival at the Shaolin Temple in, I think, 2018. But we've gone there every year, for a very long time, I think since it started. And my father was being interviewed by some TV people, and a Brazilian coach, I think he was from Brazil, he was definitely from South America, came over and he goes, is that Grandmaster Chan? And I said, yeah, that's Grandmaster Chan. And he was like, oh my gosh, I used to collect his Inside Kung Fu articles. And I also cut out that ad where it says you can come and live at the Kung Fu Temple. And I've always wanted to come there. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. Because of course, so many people have told me the same story. Like I meet Kung Fu family from around the world that's not Wallam practitioners because they never came to Orlando, but they know of my dad because of those magazines and said they had saved those clippings. And then I said, yeah, actually, that's my father. And he turned to me and he goes, oh my gosh, that means you're Sifu Mimi Chan. And I was like, yes, I am. And so it's kind of cool, right? To have this, anonymity in so much of my life, so many facets of my life. I can walk down the street and it's like I'm an everyday person. But in the martial arts world, it's another story, right? And my father, he is like the center of the universe. When he's in the room, everything just gravitates around him and he draws energy in. He's like the universe, right? The center of the universe. And for me, my universe is like much, much smaller. But I planet hop. My passport stamps for my planet hopping is like Kung Fu martial arts world, entertainment world, activism world, and solitude. Sometimes I can get very reclusive and not wanting to go anywhere, but my universe is definitely a bit smaller than my father's reach. And so one of the things I learned is that I have to have balance. I have to kind of know, hey, here's what I can be doing and where my energy is now and where it should be put. I don't always do a great job of balancing, but I have learned a lesson in balance is really important. And it is okay to be very absorbed in one thing, but also know that you have other opportunities and other pieces of you that you can kind of prioritize at different times. So going back to my childhood, I, of course, recall candles and cake and parties. And most of those parties were dual birthday parties. My sister and I always had, up until I think at least we were 12 or 13, our birthdays together. People would ask, oh, are you guys twins? And we have to go through the whole explanation. No, we're not twins. I was born January 30th, 1978. Tina was born January 26th, 1979. So do your math, right? And we're not even a year apart. How could that be? Well, my sister was born 14 weeks early. For those of you who watch the documentary, you have seen Tina was like 800 grams or whatever, so tiny, like a little doll. And she had to get, I think it was Pampers that sent specially made diapers for her because she spent the first year in the hospital. She almost didn't survive. And so we were barely a year apart, and so our birthdays always fell around the same time. We would always have dual birthday parties, and it was interesting because it was very different. Like back when I was small, I feel like even though I was naturally an introvert, I was forced to be an extrovert. I kind of was in a position where I was always at really big events, really big parties. My family, my mom's one of 9, 28 first cousins. They've all expanded as well. There was always about 100 people at our parties. This is not an exaggeration because it's immediate family who mostly lived in Orlando. And then there was also the Wallum family, who, of course, those are the people that we actually see every day. So they would always be invited to these events. And it makes me think about like my introvert nature and my extrovert lifestyle, and like which one gets prioritized at different times, like who comes out. But it was just always very overwhelming. And without realizing it, something I learned at a really young age was how to socialize and how to engage and how to kind of turn those two facets of myself on and off, right? How to kind of tap into my extrovert personality that I would need to do for quote unquote the public, and then being able to kind of have that solitude and that introvert personality when it was just me, or when I was in my smaller group settings. Obviously, big lessons I learned when I was smaller was say hello, be gracious, thank everyone, and be respectful. I was very poignantly reminded if I did not do those things, because Asian family, number one, so as Asian Americans, that's absolutely important. And if not, I would definitely feel guilty because Asian American, but also I was raised Catholic at the time and I went to Catholic school. So there's like the double whammy and double dose of guilt that was very much instilled in me. So I definitely learned how to feel very guilty. But those are the years that I also learned a lot about unconditional love and forgiveness. Because even when I was not on the nice list, and maybe I was testing the limits and pushing the envelope and just testing the waters, or I would talk back because I was so tired, or I wanted to get my way and I whined, there was definitely consequences. Spanking was definitely on the list of things in my childhood. But I will say, I can't even tell you I was probably spanked very often, because the fear of it happening was far greater and enough to where I don't think that was even like the physicality of it. It was more like you don't want to disappoint your parents. You don't want to be upsetting them, and you don't want to be like that person, right? So the fear of punishment was always kind of beyond the actual punishment itself. But the biggest thing I think I learned from that whole punishment thing is that there are consequences for your actions when you are not acting properly. And I won't bore you with mundane teen stories, because nobody wants to hear about teenage Mimi, right? That's going to take too long. I'll save it for another podcast. But essentially, I always talk about the famous starfruit tree story, where I learned about control and patience, which is the Foji Dojun, right? Where I learned how to wait. I learned that patience was important because, my father told me I was going to really enjoy this fruit from this tree, and I was super excited, and I ran outside. I was very, very young, and he was like, don't worry, in like 10 or 12 years, or whatever it was at the time, 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, it was many years before this fruit would bear. And he's like, you're really going to enjoy this. And so that's the story that I've told on my podcast before, on blog posts, and even in a lecture. And that is the year I learned a lot about patience. But it's kind of a given also when you're a martial artist. You have to learn patience, because the training is hard, but also the things you want to do just doesn't come easily. So I was really fortunate to have these family life lessons at the same time as my Kung Fu lessons. They kind of, again, like guilt, right? The double whammy was like the 1-2 punch. And those things always went hand in hand. The things I learned at home as an Asian American household and the things I learned at Kung Fu were very much in alignment. So it was like you were constantly getting a double dose. You be respectful to your elders. Go say hello. You bow before class to your elders and to the ancestors to show respect, right? You are patient, you are kind to your Kung Fu brothers and sisters, you're kind to your family members. So there's just like a lot of parallels and a lot of things growing up. So my formative years were super, super memorable in terms of just really instilling all of the fundamentals of who I believe I really am today. And another thing I learned, as we're talking about birthdays and memories and learning, is I learned about loss very, very early. My mom is the youngest in her family. So most of my cousins and my uncles and aunts are much, much older. They have very extended families. I've been to a lot of funerals and weddings. And a lot of my friends in school said they'd never even been to a funeral or a wedding. And I'm like, oh, I'm on my 15th wedding for the season. And then funerals were aplenty, unfortunately, because not just for my family, but our reach was so wide because of the Wallam family. We had extended family. We had so many people we were in contact with. One of the most impressionable moments I had was in middle school. I remember attending the funeral for a very close friend of ours, son who had died, and he died because he was killed by a drunk driver. And I'll never forget that, because at that moment I knew that there were consequences to driving drunk and that one should never drink and drive. I mean, nowadays you have Uber, so really Lyft and Uber, right? You have ride shares. There's absolutely no excuse. But texting and driving is the thing now, right? So, but I learned that lesson very, very early. And I think when each year passes and we think about our day of birth and we think about our birthday, it makes us kind of reflect about who we are and what does this year hold for me? What have the previous years held for me? Or maybe it's just because that means I'm really, really old. It's making me reflective, but it's definitely something that stands out in my brain. Like one of the things that are really most memorable to me. In this past decade, it's just been such an adventure. You know, my 20s, I think, was very much focused on finishing college, getting through and starting my life, whatever that meant, which was here, being at the temple and being full-time, being completely committed. And at the same time, I also explored entertainment and I went off to LA and I learned to be on my own and lots of different lessons there. I'll talk about my LA lifestyle another time, which I am such an East Coast girl. It just did not work out. Sorry, West Coast. But this past decade, my 30s into where I'm at now, it's just been the most amazing adventure. And I'm not going to give you my whole life story today, but I just really wanted to share a little bit about the lessons I've learned, because I feel like I get asked about them in different ways and from different things, not just interviews, but from different people, from different interactions I've had. And I think it's really fascinating because I've had this unique opportunity to learn in very different environments than someone who just had kind of a very traditional family life of a parents who had 9-to-5 jobs. I was really exposed to a world of different things. You know, as a child, I learned fundamentals. As a young adult, I learned the importance of family and all of that structure and that unit. And as adult, I really feel, I feel like I can say I'm an adult now. I think I'm, again, on the other side of the rainbow. But as an adult, I feel like I've really learned to appreciate each moment. And that time just goes so quickly, because before you know it, you're on that other side of the rainbow and you're 46 and you think, wow, I'm so lucky because I've seen all 7 continents around the world. I've experienced highs and lows, and I continue to spend quality time with the people I love and enjoy by choice. So I get to choose who I want to be around, and that's a privilege. And I love having this podcast to communicate with you, even though at times it's very hectic to meet deadlines and to kind of try to find time to talk to the people that I've interviewed. I have gotten to meet so many amazing humans through this podcast. There are so many projects that have happened because of the relationships that I've built. I have friends that I never thought I would have through this podcast because of this as being the catalyst. So those of you listening today, and especially those of you who've listened from day one, thank you to Oscar, and I'm going to shout out to Aaron because I think he's listened to every single episode. Thank you. Thank you for just allowing me to have a voice and allowing me to share and encouraging me to do so. I want to give a special shout out to my patrons who support me on Patreon and actually fund this podcast so that I can have a team that helps put this together and get this out to you in a timely manner. In all honesty, over the last 6+ years of doing this, I've very rarely missed very many weeks. I've kept this pretty consistent, and that's kind of a miracle, really, but even amidst all the crazy things I do. But I just want to share my gratitude on my birthday for all of you who are listening right now or watching. Thank you to the YouTube people watching as well. And I would love to hear from you about what lessons you learn when you think about your birthday or whatever time of reflection it kind of kicks in for you. And let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are. So thanks for tuning in today, and happy birthday to me.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan.